listening to Bliss and Grit. I'm Brooke Thomas, and I'll be joined shortly by my very dear friend and co-host, Vanessa Scotto. So on this show, we are talking about being students on the embodied spiritual path, and what does that actually mean? So what is a real evolution of our lives? How do we ultimately embrace everything? So all of the beauty and crazy, the joys and the messes, the bliss and the grit that is a human life. We'll be feeling our way through the path, and you can listen along here on the show as we do. In today's episode, which happens to be our first episode, I'm interviewing the divine Vanessa Scotto, so you can get a feel for who she is and what shape her path has taken and is taking. Just a note before we dive in that Vanessa and I do have potty mouths. So if there are kiddos around, pop in the headphones and just generally be prepared for some grown-up language. Okay, so I'm going to start with a little introduction about my relationship to Vanessa. Very dear friend of mine. We've been friends for many, many years. And I say this all the time, but so I've never had love at first sight with a man, like this romantic idea of you see them from across the room and you just know it's like important connection. But I've often had love at first sight with the women who become my lifelong friends. And that's totally true with Vanessa. So she and I met back in the day in Brooklyn, where I think it was 2003. Vanessa was an acupuncturist and running a wellness center in Carroll Gardens. And on this particular day, I just moved into Carroll Gardens and I was looking for an office. So I was walking around my new neighborhood. It's very old school, non-internet way to find an office. And it was the same day that you had just hung up office for rent sign in the window. It was like very rom-com cuteness.
We love synchronicity.
Just walk in. So we went in and we talked. I still remember what you were wearing, which you didn't think that was true until I described it to you when we were in Crestone at Dharma Ocean a while ago. And you're like, I still have that tank top. And it was totally a lightning striking moment. So Vanessa and I practiced together in that space for many years. Me as a Rolfing practitioner, Vanessa as an acupuncturist. Since then, we have been through marriages, divorces, love lost, love gained, multiple moves to multiple cities, new educations, drama, no drama, shifting around. And I feel really, really lucky to consider Vanessa a Dharma sister of mine. Very lucky, very grateful. And that we get to be on this path together, that you're the person that we can text about what amazing new episode we're listening to of Buddha at the gas pump, or what amazing quote from Reggie Ray we want to share. So it's a delight that we get to talk here.
Yes, thank goodness for you. So my husband doesn't have to deal with all my spiritual geekiness.
I know, it's so nice to have somebody where you can be like, have you been reading this article by Judith Blackstone? No, I'm going to read it right now. Mm-hmm. So why don't we start? Because the goal of this episode is that people can get to know you and be introduced to you before we dive into having conversations more frequently on this show. Back in the Brooklyn days, you were an acupuncturist running a wellness center. And since then, you've transitioned out of Chinese medicine. But if we can go back all the way to there, like what was the initial impulse towards Chinese medicine? And then we'll get into what you're up to now.
I think the initial impulse towards Chinese medicine is actually the same impulse in what moved me towards counseling and then towards meditation teaching. It's actually always been the same, which I find fascinating because, we spend so much time trying to figure out who we are, even still, who am I? What gifts do I bring to the world? What's my specialty? And then, you look back and you're like, oh God, it's always been there. It's like, it's just weaving together in this beautiful tapestry. And so I think back then, I know back then, I know that what brought me towards Chinese medicine and then eventually the rest of my path was I had, I'm going to go back even farther actually, was that sometime in my early childhood when I was trying to figure out the meaning of life as a normal 7-year-old may do, the only thing I could come up with was that we were here to serve people. And I really can't imagine that I thought that as a kid, but I did. I thought, we're here to help people. And as I started on my journey, as I just went through my life, I had a lot of personal issues, physical ailments, some psychological distress. I actually think, really looking back, I had a lot of existential dilemma. And for me, as I started to explore, like, what does this all mean, and how could I shift this, and how do I make sense out of this, I became very clear for myself that the body, mind, and spirit all needed to be looked at, like all together. And I went to college and I got my, I studied psychology and I studied neurobiology, and I was looking at maybe going into Western medicine, and then I was looking at going into psychology. And back then, I'm 42 now, when I went to college over 20 years ago, they didn't really have a very good discussion of mind-body connection, never mind spirit, which is still, barely touched upon. And I realized that either side was missing something. If I went into medicine, it was missing the fact that our lives, our histories, our thoughts, our experiences affected our bodies. And if I went into psychology, they didn't really seem to pay attention to the fact that if my hormones were out of balance, if my neurotransmitters were out of balance, I could have a psychological effect. And of course, as I said, nobody seemed to be talking about the spirit at all. And so when I graduated school, I just kind of worked and moved to Hawaii and lived life. And I got an acupuncture treatment. It really felt like someone had turned on the lights energetically. Like, I don't know if you had this, Brooke, when you had your first acupuncture treatment. Some of you may relate, but it was like I was high, like someone turned on the floodlights and I got high. And I fell in love with the medicine because they said you cannot separate the body, the mind, and the spirit. They are absolutely inextricable. You cannot look at one without automatically looking at the other. And so it was like I found home.
That's gorgeous. I love that so much, that's the thing that led you. And from there, it evolved, though, as these things do. So you practiced as an acupuncturist in Chinese medicine for how many years was it? It was at least a decade, right?
Gosh, yeah. I mean, I got licensed in 99 and I opened a wellness center in Brooklyn in 2000. And I guess then I moved to San Francisco. So I was practicing Chinese medicine for over a decade. I mean, technically, I was practicing it even as of a couple of years ago, so really longer. So about 15 years, but 10 before I already started to make the shift.
And so what was the call? What was the next evolution towards?
Well, I guess that's the thing, we're constantly evolving, and I was constantly evolving, and you knew this very well back then, Brooke, and I'm practicing Chinese medicine with people. And I realized that even though this kind of medical system, this medical point of view had the understanding that the body and the mind and the spirit were linked, it wasn't showing up a lot in the kind of training I received, and it wasn't showing up in my client sessions. I guess it's better to say, I didn't have the container to work with that within my client sessions. So, I was treating people, let's say, for back pain, and I would help them get better. Their lumbar spine would relax and they'd feel less pain. And then their shoulder would hurt, and then their neck would hurt. And I don't know, I guess, recently I told somebody that I was a life coach. It was someone in Sedona. And she said to me, "Are you psychic?" And I was like, "No, what a funny question. But I guess all the Sedona life coaches are psychic." And I'm like, "I'm not psychic, but I am intuitive. And I do sense things." That's kind of the way that I work with this unseen information. I've always been able to feel emotions and feel perceptions. And so that was what was happening in my Chinese medicine practice looking back, only I didn't have a way to talk about it with people. So it's I understood I was treating their pain, but that it was so much more than just a muscle spasm, that it went all these layers deeper, but I didn't feel like I had, well, on some level, the right. That's what I mean by the container, because that's not what they were coming for. But moreover, the depth and the understanding to address all of that with them. So the call kind of got loud, and I started to get really irritated in my practice, really impatient. I wanted something different. I thought about going to school to study theology. I looked at going to the Harvard theology program. It wasn't quite right. I just knew something spiritual wanted to come through. I was already meditating by then, quite a bit. And then I found John Welwood. And if you all are interested in Buddhism and psychology, please look up John Welwood, his book, Towards the Psychology of Awakening. You talked about like a lightning bolt when you met me, Brooke. It was like, I got that book. Someone gave it to me as a gift. And it was like, I could not put it down. It was like, this is my life. That was how I felt. Like, this is everything. And I went and I studied with John. And that was it. It was like psychology and spirituality, or as they call it, transpersonal psychology. Like, this is everything to me. So I packed up. I moved to San Francisco and I went back to grad school and I started studying with John Welwood weekly and meditating, and, never looked back since. It's been my path, and it's just kind of ever deepening.
Now, you trained at, what was the name of the school that you did your master's degree at in San Francisco?
I got my second master's in counseling psychology at California Institute of Integral Studies, or people call it CIIS. And the program itself, the reason why, well, first of all, I wanted to move to San Francisco. But the other reason why I went to that program was there's very few schools in the country that have a specialty, that are accredited master's programs, but have a specialty in the integration of spirituality and psychology. And that was like the only thing I wanted. There was nothing traditional about my approach. And so it was kind of like that or bust.
I love it. And, like you said, there was nothing traditional. You knew you wanted to tie it to spirituality, not tie it to, but acknowledge that they're inextricably linked. So when you finished your master's degree, the route for you you knew it wasn't going to be, and it wasn't the conventional, hang up a shingle and now be a therapist. So what happened next? What was the next part of that evolution?
Yeah, it was so funny because I went into school knowing I likely would not hang up a shingle and become a licensed psychotherapist. I was already working as a life coach with people for a while, even when I was doing my acupuncture, because I had been working with a mentor who was a life coach and psychologist, and I started seeing clients. It's just that was very goal oriented, and it felt like something was missing for me. So I just went to school to kind of deepen my personal evolution, actually, in large part, and then also to learn really good counseling skills. Because as I was life coaching people, I noticed that they were going really deep with me. I mean, once you listen to someone, they open up, and out comes just really core issues that they were dealing with. And I didn't feel really competent. So, went back to school. I knew I wouldn't be a therapist. I knew I'd be integrating kind of concepts of energy and Chinese medicine and nutrition and coaching. But even still, it was a struggle not to become a therapist. It just speaks to how strong the collective energy of a group can be, and how fast we can doubt ourselves. But I did. I managed. I came out. I did what I wanted. I call myself a life coach because don't really have a better word for it. But mostly what I've come to do as it's unfolded is just I do counseling and I do meditation. And a lot of the style of work I do is getting people into their body while we're talking so that they're actually really present with, I guess you could say the pain body, but it's just all of the stored memories and emotions and experiences and beliefs that they're not interested in acknowledging from their conscious mind, or they're scared to acknowledge. So right now, a lot of my work, it sometimes integrates meditation practice, but as we talk one-on-one, well, it's really a reflection of what's helped me. It's helping people get present so they can feel and see and know all of the subtle things that have been holding them back from, I guess, essentially being more free.
So our show is going to, for those of you listening to this first episode, is going to talk about the body as the path, or what role the body has in personal evolution constantly. So I'll save that for further conversations down the road. Spoiler alert, we're going to talk about that a lot. But I think that, it's a foreign concept. I'll say that. I think for a lot of people, that getting in the body can be the path towards your own progress and unfolding. And so giving examples can be the clearest way for people to understand that. And since I'm interviewing you, I'm curious what your path has looked like of experiencing your own body as a way towards personal evolution, maybe starting back from, earlier when you felt so alive from that acupuncture session, and like where things have gone and continue to go from there.
Yeah, gosh. Well, if you go back to that acupuncture session, that's just about energy. It's like when someone opened the flow of energy, because I was so constricted in my body, it felt like a high, right? And sometimes when people meditate, they talk about these kind of states people can reach, things like samadhi or nirvana, and they're these temporary, or for some people, perhaps lasting states where you're like, it's like bliss, like oneness, where you see what's possible beyond what your typical everyday mind has been offering to you. So that's how I see that acupuncture experience. And I know that I went through more as I was getting acupuncture, but my clearest awareness of how my body began to be like the entryway to my evolution was when I started doing therapy in my 20s. And I was working with a therapist who does a style of therapy called Hakomi, which is what we call a somatic-based psychotherapy. It is so good if any of you are out there looking to have a more present-based embodied therapy. And I started with this guy, and Brooke, it's so funny when you look back, because it's so hard to imagine how different your beliefs and experiences were back then as compared to now. So I was really burdened with a very strong belief system around being unlovable. I was burdened with a very, very strong belief system around my pain not being welcome, me being selfish, me being bad. I was just in so much resistance to what I was feeling and experiencing. I am so smart. I don't mean to say that in an arrogant way. I mean, like when you try to do therapy with someone who's got a particular level of intelligence, they can be very wily. Why I'm saying that is that it's like I understood my patterns. So I can be very intellectual and say, okay, well, when I was growing up, I was the youngest and I was kind of left out. There was a big age gap between me and my sisters, and my parents were controlling, and my father was very angry, and I could understand a lot of what, was creating some of these thought processes. And I could even rationalize them. Oh, but my father didn't mean to, and he's a good guy, and there's no need to be angry. And I did all of that. And the upshot of it was I didn't let myself feel any of my feelings. It's like, it's kind of like a form of dissociation. Like I was up in my head and the volume was turned down on my unconscious, on my body, because my body was storing it. At that point, I didn't understand my body was storing it until I would start to go through these experiences with my therapist. And, I'd be telling him a story about my childhood, let's say, and he would be like, okay, well, slow down, take a breath. How does that feel in your body? Like, what are you noticing? So let's say, for example, my father, who's a beautiful man who I love today, but had really deep rage problems that created quite a bit of trauma for me as a young child. I thought, well, I'm not angry at him. I love him. I had a very normal childhood. These are all things I would say. When I slowed down and I got in my body as I was guided, and I really got to the truth of what was happening, not what I wanted to happen, but like what was really up, it was like I was fucking scared for my life. I was terrorized. I was angry as all get out that I was threatened. I mean, it was like a whole new world open for me. And I think that's the very common thing. We have these very smart brains, and we I guess we have a habit where we don't want to feel what we don't want to feel, and we don't want to be who we don't want to be. And it seems like it would be safer because when we were young, it was to create a certain identity or experience. So we just like stuff it down and we disconnect and we deny and avoid. And we try to be something. And that was what I was doing. Only I was like kind of always fighting against myself and I was exhausted. So as I started going through this like therapy process, and I was already also meditating at the time, all of this world of emotion and all of these irrational, subconscious wounds and beliefs started bubbling forward. And it was really freaking uncomfortable. And honestly, I spent a few years in therapy, in part because I was going to school and you had to, but I needed it. You know, I spent a few years in therapy just being with someone who had empathy as all of these feelings and emotions and stored wounds were bubbling to the surface that I didn't even know were there to a certain extent.
So you mentioned that you spent this time doing therapy and working in Hakomi. And what came next? Like as all of that moved through?
Well, so that was a bit of a process. I even did EMDR, which is another really cool style of therapy, but it was a bit of a process. And in the meantime, I had gotten a divorce and I had moved to San Francisco and started grad school. And all of this was kind of happening in the same grouping of years around like my early 20s, like very, very fun times.
Who doesn't love the 20s?
Who does not love a lot of therapy? But the really, I guess the amazing part, the real upshot is I learned to let go differently. I don't know. When I went to school for therapy, there's two things that like stand out in my mind. Two moments that kind of startled me. One was when someone said that most of your choices in life are determined by your unconscious mind. And that was super uncomfortable for me. I really, really wanted to be in control. You know, I still kind of do, but I really wanted to be in control of them. Like the idea that there was something beyond my thinking mind that could be calling the shots was ridiculously unsettling at first. And the other thing that was like a reflection of who I was at that time period was I did group therapy where everyone gets to tell you all about yourself. And people were saying that I was so packaged. I was so like almost like too perfectly put together. Like they were intimidated by me. They were almost put off by it. Like they didn't feel like they could get close to me. And that was something for me to consider. And I realized over time that I was a New York City girl. I was Italian. I was very armored and self-protected, even though always a very sensitive being. So it was like, I didn't feel comfortable like letting go and just relaxing and being open and flowing with people. And that was a lot of what was up then. And so after school, thank God that had shifted already. And, of course, working with clients helps that too. And I found myself more available. I really magically, after 4 years of therapy, dispelled the belief that I wasn't lovable, which was such a thorn in my psychic side for a long time, to New York. And then I hated it. And I moved again to Miami and I got remarried and started practicing with people. And then kind of along that way, still the yearning for a deeper spiritual path was calling to me. I found what's called Tantric Buddhism. It's a style of Tibetan Buddhism. And I started doing practices with a Tibetan teacher, a pretty world-renowned Tibetan teacher. Had some really, really beautiful openings around that, like some very powerful, mystical, trippy moments. But something felt like it was missing still, like something just, there was, I don't know, you get that itch. You don't know what the itch is, but something was missing. And eventually I found my way to these Reggie Ray podcasts. And again, strike of lightning. I was like, this is a teacher I need to study with. And what really had struck me was his practices, his meditation practices were all about the body. and going into the body and accessing the body and like inhabiting your body. And they're also, interestingly enough, Tantric Buddhism, Tibetan Tantric Buddhism, but they come from like a different approach and a different lineage. And it was such the kind of opposite of the practices I was doing before. The ones I was doing before was like a lot of visualization, a lot of mantra, a lot of chanting. This was different. It was like removing so many of the layers of the kind of Tibetan like cultural energy and viewpoints. And it was just getting you present, connecting to the earth, grounding, being in the body. And that felt like medicine to me. It had almost felt like I had skipped a step, because in the back of my mind, I knew that I was still struggling just being fully present to my life, and still struggling being fully connected to myself and to something larger and to others. And so my next step really was deepening my practice from there with Reggie Ray, with Dharma Ocean. And man, those practices have changed my life.
Yeah, hallelujah to that. Before we get into a little bit more of Dharma Ocean, it might be worth doing a glossary term here on what tantric means, because it's a word that's been really corrupted in our culture. So I don't expect you to give like the perfect Tibetan Buddhist definition of it, but maybe even just some of what it's not.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely couldn't, but I can say it's not sex.
Right. It's not hot orgies.
Yeah. Unfortunately, you know, at some point, the Tantric Buddhists and the Tantric yogis were really about energy. You know, they really, really worked with energy in the body. They worked with energy in the cosmos. They believed that their nervous system was a subtle energy body, and that by working with it, you could open yourself up to other realms of experience. You could open yourself up to experiences of oneness, to bliss. You could become more free. And so they did a lot of work with the body. They did a lot of work with energy channels. And so, yes, actually, historically, there were some people who in these traditions were working with sex as a vehicle.
Sure.
So it's not that this came out of nowhere that people used it. But of course, as we do in the West, it's like the worst is we take everything and we sensationalize it and we remove it from its traditions and its religion and its cultural origins. And people have corrupted it, as you said, and made it about like, here's how to have good sex.
Right. You want to have sex for 12 hours? We'll teach you how.
Yeah. When really what Tantra was about, it was like, it's about the fact that what we could say is like form and formless exist at once. So it's kind of like form is my body and the fact that I have to work and the fact that like, I have to go to the bathroom and I could get sick and like, you know, all of these, like, we could call them like mundane material realities exist. And at the very same time, there is this magic and this alchemy and this energy and this oneness. And they are both a part of our experience at the same time. So when you were working with tantric practices, it was really about being present to reality as it is, finding that alchemical place, finding that place of magic in your everyday life, and doing it through like another way to say Tantra in this case that oftentimes Reggie will say is Tibetan yoga, because a little less corrupted a term. Mm-hmm. But it's really, honestly, it's how to be actually present, which is a much bigger thing than you think.
Yes. Nothing is what we think it is. I keep learning that one over and over again. Yeah, that was a beautiful, beautiful definition. Thank you, of explaining what tantric practices in Tibetan yoga actually means. So you discovered Dharma Ocean and began to engage more with those practices and with that lineage. What did that look like? What did that unfolding look like?
So it was a while where I was just practicing. I downloaded a bunch of meditations and I was practicing on my own and I was in love with them. And then of course, you know, you did a podcast and I was like, you've got to listen to Reggie Ray. You're going to love it. And
I had my lightning bolt sobbing. This is my teacher.
For those of you who don't know Brooke goes into extreme states of passion, and it's like, this is my teacher for life. And
she's not a problem.
Yeah, she is never unclear about what she's passionate about. And so it deepened. And eventually I was like, I have to go and study more about this tradition and practice with a teacher and study these practices. And so I went and I did that 5-month-long training program. It's called Meditating with the Body. And we did that in Crestone, Colorado. Man, it was fucking magical.
Totally.
I mean, for any of you who haven't been to Crestone, Colorado, go look it up. I didn't even know about this place until I did the training. And, you'll read a lot of like crazy things about it. And it's an energy vortex, the way that you may have heard of Sedona as being. And, I actually do get into energy, but the words never really clicked for me. But when you go there and you're practicing meditation 7 hours a day and you're in silence and you're tuning into your body, man, it was like, wow, I could cry just thinking about it. If you guys were watching me on video, you'd see me welling up. It's like, it is like coming home. Only home is a much better place than you thought.
Oh, it's gorgeous. Yeah.
Right? It's like, it was so much better than I could have conceptualized of for myself. And I remember, when you do these meditations, so it's like, you all can imagine for a second right now, like, imagine you can feel your hands for a second, like just be aware of your hands and be aware of the air on your hands, the temperature. And then try to enter your hands, like enter your hands with your awareness, like you're inside of them, feeling every pulse, every sensation, like the inside out. And it's like that. That's what you do. You're like inside of your feet, inside of your legs, in your body. It is presence. And as I would do that, you get a lot of like, for me, I get a lot of metaphor as I'm going through this kind of a practice. And sometimes I see visuals, sometimes I get sensations, sometimes knowings. But one of the visuals that I got was like, it's almost like every different part of my body was pulsing at a different pace, like at a different rhythm. I felt fragmented. In truth, it's not possible to be fragmented, but it was a really clear metaphor that I was disconnected in some regard. And as we went through the retreat, I felt whole. I could feel like my whole body, like kind of vibrating at the same time and moving. And I can feel the sensations and I can feel the connection to the ground and to my heart. And as that happened, I felt whole. And I don't know if you have moments where you pop in and out of this, but the level of wholeness and naturalness and mountainness and presentness that I felt was remarkable. Like it's still visceral and palpable. And that was it, and there was more. I got trippy stories and, things I could share as the 5 months went on. But that was it. That moment was enough for me to understand that it was like, this is where it's at. I spent most of my life looking for answers outside of myself. I looked for someone to prove I was lovable, and I looked for someone to tell me I was okay and I was acceptable and I was normal. And I looked for teachers to show me what enlightenment felt like. And I looked and I saw it and I did all of those things, and always like outside books. I could consume 2 books a day if I didn't have work. And then here it was. And it was like, holy shit, the body is a realm to these unseen experiences, both within me, both like continuing on my therapy, like aspects of myself that have not yet released, conditioning that's still creating constricting, and also to other worlds, other dimensions, other states of being. And hence I'm sold. The body is my temple.
And knowing that, like we were saying, nothing is what we think it is. We have to realize that we live in a time and a place where people love to glorify, when you're on a good path, things just get better and better and better and better until it's perfect, that's not true. So acknowledging that the path is a lot more surprising,
so not true.
And circuitous than we ever think. acknowledging all of that, where are you at now with your process, with your waking up and being in your body?
Girl, my mentor, Kieran, says, truth heals, right? And man, this is where I'm at. I'm at the place where I'm seeing my layers of conditioning that still remain very clearly, both through being mentored, like having support from someone else who can help me identify what seems like so normal to me, like the air I breathe. They can help me kind of bring that into the light of day. And also through the meditation practices, it's like I'm still seeing tons of layers of conditioning. I still believe on some level I'm a burden to the people I love. I still believe on some level that love requires sacrifice. I still have these kinks and these layers of experience that feel toxic or feel painful. And at first it was shocking because it was almost like I went through a stage of bliss and I felt whole and I felt present and I felt connected to everything. And the trees are talking to me, for fuck's sake. Everything is like, what? Bliss. And of course I still have those moments, but what continued to unfold was like, and holy shit, I still have that belief. I still have the part of me that was afraid to live. I still have the part of me that, really doubts myself, right? Like these aspects of my life that have been stored. And that was really painful at first. And it was very humbling. I'd sit in meditation and waves of it would come over me and then it became really beautiful. And it became like, of course, like, this is it. This is human. Like, there's more and it's rich. And it became about like opening more and more, which I'm finding more and more capacity. By the way, Brooke, I haven't even talked to you about how much more capacity I'm finding, but to trust that truth heals. And what that means is that truth is reality. It means not pushing away the feelings I have in my body because I don't want them or I don't think I should have them. It means not pushing away the conditioning because it's not pleasant. It means being with it all. Every feeling, every need, every sensation, every desire, not action-oriented being with, but just making space. Like, it's all there. Not trying to pretend or deny or reject, which I swear to God, as I watch myself, I see how we do on such a regular basis. It is astounding. I dare all of you included, Brooke, to like watch yourself for one day. The number of times you try to make something different than it is. You tell yourself you should want to do something you don't want to do. You move away from what you know would be right for you to do something that would like make other people happy. I mean, watch the number of times a day. Like, so my whole practice now, besides meditation, which I don't even do every single day, but I do quite regularly. But my whole practice on top of what I feel like my real practice is just trying to like be present with truth and trust that everything is like kind of unfolding and healing and welcome. Do you know what I mean?
I'm sitting over here on my passionate self going, because that's the only thing that matters in the whole world.
And that's why we have to dedicate
I'm dedicating my entire life to it. Yes. I know what you mean. And I think that you've done such justice to why we call it bliss and grit. It's the bliss and the grit. And it's always happening at the same time. And there's always more.
And there's always more. And I just want to say that it's like, as you go through a certain amount of evolution, at first when I'd hit the grit, Brooke, it was like so fucking hard. I didn't want it.
So reverse. Yeah.
I didn't want it.
Obviously.
And really, it's almost why, like, sometimes a teacher that Brooke and I sometimes studied named Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, who was a Tibetan Buddhist, used to say, like, if you can avoid the path, go ahead and avoid it. It's a hard one, right? But he also used to say that sometimes depression and anxiety were our friends. And the reason why they were our friends is because they would kind of put us to the task of going in to solve it. That's kind of how I see my life. It's like the grit was super gritty at certain points. Man, I did not want it. But conversely, I could not live the other way. I mean, my system gets to the point where it does not want to live the other way. I couldn't tolerate the opposite, which was the anxiety, the feeling fake, the feeling empty, the discontentment, the twisting. I couldn't tolerate it. So in the beginning, I sat with the grit because it was like I didn't have a better choice, and then over time now, as I've gotten to a certain place within myself, it's like I sit with it because it's what's real and because it's what's true. And above all, the only thing I've ever wanted, really, what I was always seeking was truth. That's it. So that's this. So now it has a certain intrinsic beauty about it that's real. It's not cognitive, because I knew in my mind prior, like I should feel good about this. Everything is sacred. But I didn't feel that way. And currently more and more and more and more, I'm feeling like, man, it's all sacred. The bliss and the grit of it. It's all us. It's all our life. It's all precious. It's all human. It's all spiritual. There's nothing you can do that's not spiritual. P.S. And now it's for real. Now that's a very cellular experience. So bliss and grit continues to take on like a richer and richer meaning for me as well.
Oh my God, I love you so much.
I love you.
And I hope that all of you listening get a little peek at how magical and genuine and true Vanessa is. And I'm so glad we get to do this together and have these conversations.
I'm looking forward to so much more to come.
On behalf of both Vanessa and I, thank you so much for listening to our first episode. Our second episode came out right about at the same time, where we flip, and Vanessa is interviewing me, so you can get to know me a little bit better as the other host of the show. After that, we're going to be just generally having more conversations about what it means to be on the path and all that kind of thing. If you want to follow along with us a little bit more beyond just the listening, you can do that at blissandgrit.com. We're still getting our shit together, but that website does exist and it will evolve over time as the show evolves. And we're also on Facebook. So, hey, now we've got that going for us. That's /blissandgrit. We'll whip up a Twitter account in there somewhere and we'll see how that all goes. But we're on iTunes, we're on Stitcher, and really hope that you continue to listen along. We are delighted to hear from anyone in any way, shape, or form, feedback, and all that good stuff. I look forward to chatting with you all more in the future. Thank you so much.